The plan for a quiet weekend had been on his mind for weeks. After dealing with the pressure of work, noise from neighbors, and the constant nagging from the HOA back in town, he felt like he needed to breathe somewhere far from rules, warnings, and community meetings. The lake cabin was the perfect escape. Hidden among tall pine trees and sitting right beside clear, still water, it was a place where he could finally rest without checking emails or hearing someone complain about lawn height. He drove early in the morning, windows down, the cool wind brushing across his face. The closer he got to the cabin, the lighter he felt inside. The stress that normally clung to him slowly faded away with every mile. When he finally parked near the cabin, he stepped out and took a deep breath, letting the scent of pine and fresh water soak into him. This place always felt like a different world, quiet, safe, untouched. He unlocked the cabin door, walked inside, and smiled at the familiar wooden walls and cozy layout. Everything was simple, no fancy furniture, no noisy gadgets, just a small kitchen, a fireplace, a couch that had seen better days, and a view of the lake that never disappointed. He dropped his bag and opened the windows to let the natural air fill the room. Just as he started preparing the cabin for the weekend, his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, thinking it might be another HOA message, but he checked anyway. Instead, it was from an old friend he hadn't seen in years, someone who had been with him through some of the hardest and best times of his life. The message was short. "I'm nearby for a conference. Any chance you're at the lake cabin this weekend?" He smiled a little and texted back, telling him to come over. The timing couldn't have been better. He hadn't expected company, but this was someone he trusted, someone who knew him like family. What he didn't expect was for that old friend to show up, not just as someone he used to know, but as someone with one of the highest legal positions in the state. About an hour later, he heard a car driving up the dirt path. He stepped outside and waved as his friend stepped out. They shared a warm handshake, the kind that carried years of history. It felt like no time had passed between them. They went inside, talking about how life had changed, how fast time had moved, and how the world seemed different now. His friend put down his bag and looked around the cabin with a soft smile. "Same place as always," he said, and there was something comforting in those words. As they settled inside, they prepared some coffee and sat near the window. The warm drink, the calm view of the lake, and the quiet surroundings made everything feel peaceful. For a while, they simply enjoyed the silence. Then his friend asked casually, "So, how's everything in your neighborhood? Last time we talked, you mentioned some trouble with the HOA." He let out a tired laugh. Trouble is one way to say it. It's gotten worse. His friend raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. He took another sip of coffee before speaking. "There's one board member. She's a little too intense about her authority. She acts like the whole town is under her control. Always checking for things to complain about. Always sending notices. She even tried to tell me I couldn't park my own truck in front of my house because she thought it was too large for the aesthetics." His friend listened quietly, but his expression shifted, slightly focused. "Thoughtful, he continued. Her behavior just gets worse. Sometimes she shows up unannounced, says she's doing inspections. She's gotten so used to bossing people around that no one pushes back anymore. It's easier to stay quiet than deal with her shouting." His friend leaned back on the chair. "You know, we've been getting a lot of complaints like that. HOAs acting outside their authority, threatening people, making up rules. It's becoming a real problem across the state." He looked up, surprised. "Really? I thought it was just my neighborhood." "Not even close," his friend said, shaking his head. "Some of these boards are abusing their power, taking advantage of residents. We're actually reviewing a few cases right now." He paused, then added with a half smile, "Maybe your situation is more interesting than you think. They talked a bit more about it, mostly in a light-hearted way, but there was a seriousness underneath. His friend wasn't just concerned, he was noticing patterns. Connecting dots. As the afternoon passed, they cooked a simple meal together. The quiet lake outside made everything feel slow and easy. They ate, laughed, and shared memories they hadn't talked about in years. It felt like a real break from everything. No stress, no HOA, no problems. But down in town, things were moving in a completely different direction. The woman from the HOA, the one who always found a reason to complain, had noticed earlier in the week that he hadn't responded to a notice she left on his door. She had written it herself, claiming it was an important matter, though it was nothing more than another attempt to show authority. When she didn't see him around the neighborhood, she grew irritated, then suspicious. She convinced herself that his lack of response meant he was hiding something, and she began asking neighbors if they had seen him. One neighbor mentioned casually that he had gone to his lake cabin. That was all she needed. Her irritation turned into determination. She felt she had been disrespected, ignored, and challenged. In her mind, she had authority, real or imagined, and she believed she had the right to act on it. She didn't consider that. The cabin had nothing to do with the HOA. She didn't think about boundaries. She didn't even pause to ask if she was allowed to go there. She simply decided she would drive there and demand answers. Her mind raced with thoughts of him breaking rules, ignoring her notices, and avoiding community responsibilities. She imagined herself giving a powerful speech, catching him off guard, and putting him in his place. She grabbed her bag, put on her jacket, and headed to her car with a firmness that belonged more to someone going to court than someone visiting a peaceful lake. The road to the cabin was long and covered with fallen leaves. She didn't enjoy the scenery. She was too focused on her mission, too fueled by self-importance to appreciate nature. In her mind, she believed she was doing something official, something big. Back at the cabin, he and his friend had moved to the small porch overlooking the water. The sun was beginning to lower, painting the surface of the lake with a golden glow. Birds sang in the trees, and the air felt cool and refreshing. His friend leaned back in the chair. "You know," he said with a thoughtful smile, "if half of what you've told me is true, that HOA board might end up getting a visit from my office." He laughed softly, assuming it was just a joke. "Well, if they get a visit, I hope they behave better with you than they do with us." Little did he know the trouble was already on the way. Far down the quiet road, a car rolled closer to the cabin, dust rising behind it. The person driving it had no idea who she was about to walk in on. She had no idea what the weekend held for her, or how her uninvited visit would change everything. He and his friend continued talking peacefully, unaware of the storm of trouble heading right toward them. The sun had already started dipping behind the trees when the quiet of the lake was interrupted by the sound of a car rolling over the gravel road. Inside the cabin, he and his old friend were still talking, completely unaware of the commotion slowly making its way toward them. They had no reason to expect visitors. The lake cabin had always been a peaceful, hidden escape, untouched by noise or arguments. But that peace was about to be shaken in a way neither of them could have predicted. Down the narrow road, the woman from the HOA gripped her steering wheel tightly. Her jaw was set, and her mind ran in circles. To her, everything felt urgent, even though nothing she was doing had any real urgency behind it. She believed she was acting with purpose, making sure the community rules were respected. Even though the cabin had nothing to do with the community at all. As she got closer to the lake, she kept replaying the situation in her mind, how he hadn't responded to her notice, how he avoided her the past week, how she convinced herself he was ignoring her authority on purpose. That idea annoyed her deeply. She wasn't used to people questioning her decisions. She wasn't used to people pushing back when she told them what to do. She believed she could handle any situation, that her role on the HOA board gave her the right to step anywhere, say anything, and demand answers. And the more she thought about it, the more her frustration grew. Her ego filled in every blank, and she worked herself into a state where she felt justified in doing almost anything. She drove faster, her irritation growing with every turn of the wheel. Back at the cabin, the energy inside was calm and warm. They had moved into the main room, watching the sunset reflect across the lake. A soft orange light stretched into the cabin, giving the wooden walls a peaceful glow. His friend looked relaxed for the first time in days. "This place really is something," he said. "I can see why you escape here whenever you get the chance. It's like the whole world disappears out here." He smiled. "Yeah, that's why I didn't want the HOA stress to follow me here. They already take too much of my time back home." His friend nodded. "You mentioned that woman from the board. What's her name again?" He shrugged slightly. "Everyone just calls her the lady with the clipboard. She's always walking around writing things down, knocking on doors, pointing out tiny things just to remind people she's in charge. She once knocked on my door because she thought my porch plants were too tall." His friend laughed lightly. "Too tall? That sounds like something pulled out of thin air." "Exactly. And she gets worse when people don't listen. She becomes dramatic, like she's protecting the neighborhood from some big danger." His friend sipped his drink thoughtfully. Power does strange things to people, especially when no one checks it. They didn't know how right he was. Meanwhile, the woman from the HOA finally reached the narrow turn leading to the cabin. She parked her car in a crooked angle, not caring how it looked. She stepped out, brushed off her jacket aggressively, and marched toward the wooden steps as though she were approaching a courtroom rather than someone's peaceful retreat. The cabin looked calm and warm from the outside, the light from inside stretching through the windows. For a moment she hesitated, but her self-importance wouldn't let her stop. She straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked toward the door. Inside the cabin, the two friends didn't hear the car because of the way the trees muted sound. They didn't hear the crunch of gravel under her shoes either. But they did hear the first loud knock, that it wasn't a gentle knock. It wasn't even a normal loud knock. It was a sharp, aggressive bang one that made the wooden frame shake slightly. He froze, confused. Who on earth? His friend looked up too, eyebrows raised. "You expecting anyone else?" "No," he said cautiously. Standing up, another series of harsh knocks followed, louder this time, almost as if someone was irritated that they hadn't already opened the door. He walked toward the entrance, feeling a mixture of confusion and caution. When he reached for the handle, he paused. Something felt off. He wasn't afraid, but the timing, the tone of the knocks, and the unexpected nature of it all made him hesitate for a moment. Before he could even open the door, the knocking stopped. But the silence only lasted for a second. Then came a voice sharp, commanding and unmistakably irritated. "I know you're in there. Open this door right now." His stomach dropped. He knew that voice dotted was her. His friend stepped closer. "Who is that?" He sighed quietly. "The lady with the clipboard." His friend gave him a look that mixed surprise with disbelief. "She followed you here?" "It sounds like she did," he said under his breath. The woman outside didn't wait. She knocked again, even louder, shouting, "This is official business. You cannot ignore me." Official business, he thought. She didn't even have authority here. She had no idea this cabin wasn't on HOA land. He opened the door slowly, trying to stay calm. "What are you doing here?" he asked, trying not to let his frustration show. She pushed past him immediately, without permission, without hesitation, walking straight into the cabin as though she owned it. His friend stepped back out of instinct, watching her with a stunned expression. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, raising his voice slightly. She ignored him entirely. She looked around the cabin, scanning the area as if she were inspecting a property for violations. Her eyes moved from the fireplace to the table to the kitchen counter, searching for anything she could use as an excuse. "You didn't respond to my notice," she said sharply. "And I'm not going to let community rules be ignored. Not by you. Not by anyone." He tried to stay calm. "This is my private cabin. The HOA has nothing to do with this place. You have no right to be here." She turned toward him with a look of disbelief, almost offended. "I have every right when it concerns community order. Your behavior reflects on the entire neighborhood." He rubbed his face, trying to gather patience. "This is not the neighborhood. You're not allowed to just walk in here." She waved off his words with an annoyed gesture. "We will discuss that later. First, I'm checking the place." His friend, who had stayed silent up until now, stepped forward with a calm authority. "Excuse me," he said. "Did he invite you in?" She glanced at him for the first time, but didn't recognize who he was. "This is between me and him," she said dismissively. "I don't need your input." His friend raised an eyebrow. "You're trespassing." "I am doing my job," she snapped. "Your job?" he repeated slowly. "It gives you permission to break into someone's cabin?" She stiffened. "I didn't break in. I knocked." "And then you forced your way inside," he replied calmly. She narrowed her eyes at him, sizing him up. "Who are you supposed to be?" His friend smiled politely. "Just someone very interested in your explanation." But she didn't care. In her mind, she was still in the right. She turned back toward him. "You can't run away from responsibilities. If you live in the community, you must follow the rules." He felt his patience slipping. "I'm not running away from anything. I came here for a break." "Well," she said sharply, "break or not, your behavior is unacceptable." His friend let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, as though he couldn't believe what he was witnessing. She walked deeper into the cabin, inspecting the place again. "I'll need to document everything," she muttered. He stepped forward. "Document what?" "This isn't HOA property." "That's what you say," she replied. "I will decide after checking everything." His friend exchanged a glance with him, one that said things were about to take a dramatic turn, and they were, because she still had no idea who she had just stormed in on. She didn't know that the quiet man sitting on the wooden chair wasn't just a friend. She didn't know she had walked straight into the presence of the most powerful legal authority in the state, and she had no idea how her actions in this cabin would shape everything that came next. The moment inside the cabin grew heavier, almost like the air had thickened. He watched as the woman from the HOA continued walking around as if she had some official right to be there. Her eyes darted from one corner of the room to another, searching for anything she could complain about or twist into a rule violation. It was almost strange how determined she was, how confidently she acted, even though she stood on completely unfamiliar ground. His friend, quiet but observant, stood with his hands loosely at his sides. He looked calm on the outside, but there was a sharp awareness in his eyes. He wasn't someone who reacted quickly or dramatically. He preferred observing before speaking, letting people reveal their own mistakes. And she was revealing plenty. She walked toward the fireplace and pointed at a stack of firewood. "This," she said firmly, "is a fire hazard. Absolutely not allowed." He blinked at her, confused. "It's firewood for the fireplace." "That doesn't matter," she said, waving her hand. "You cannot store wood inside the living area. It's against community safety guidelines. His friend cleared his throat gently. Community guidelines don't apply here. She shot him a brief, irritated look. Sir, please let me handle this. I deal with residents like this all the time. He almost laughed at the irony. She stepped over to the table next, examining the simple lamp beside it. She frowned as though she'd found something suspicious. And this wiring looks unsafe. I'll need to report this too. He rubbed his forehead. Report to who? You don't have jurisdiction here. She paused only for a second before lifting her chin. I decide what needs reporting. His friend's expression softened to something almost amused. You decide? She nodded confidently. Yes, I'm responsible for community standards. People rely on me to make sure everything is safe and orderly. And when someone acts like they're above the rules, that's when I step in. Ignoring notices is a serious matter. His friend took a slow step forward, his tone gentle but firm. Ignoring a notice is not grounds for what you're doing right now. She let out a breath of annoyance. Sir, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. I'm simply doing my job. His friend tilted his head slightly. What exactly do you believe your job allows you to do? She crossed her arms, confident in every word she spoke. To make sure residents follow the rules, even if that means going to their vacation homes and making sure they aren't hiding from HOA responsibilities. If he won't come to the board, then the board comes to him. He stared at her, stunned. She honestly believed that Dot, his friend, slowly exhaled through his nose. And forcing your way into a private cabin. You also think that's allowed? I knocked, she snapped, and then walked in without permission, he reminded her. She turned her nose slightly upward. I assumed he was avoiding me on purpose. Someone has to hold people accountable. His friend studied her face carefully. It was clear she wasn't acting out of duty. She was acting out of ego. She wanted control, authority. She wanted to feel like her position gave her power. His friend finally spoke, with a calm seriousness. You keep talking about rules, but the problem is that you don't seem to understand which rules apply to you. She narrowed her eyes. I know exactly what applies to me. He stepped closer, standing just a few feet from her now. Do you? She folded her arms tighter. Yes. There was a quiet pause just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then she said sharply, Who are you anyway? You keep asking questions like you're in charge. He gave her a gentle smile. I'm someone who deals with legal matters. Her expression twisted with annoyance. Well, unless you work for the board, you're not needed here. This is community business. His friend nodded slowly. Community business. Right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his ID wallet. He held it casually, not flashing it dramatically, but offering it like a calm explanation. She glanced at it at first with the same irritation she'd shown everything else, but the second her eyes focused properly, the color drained from her face. Her breath caught. Her arms slowly dropped to her sides. She stared at the official state seal. She stared at the name under it. She stared at the title that made her knees weaken. He didn't have to say anything dramatic. His voice stayed soft and steady. I'm the state attorney general. The room felt completely silent. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes darted between him and the man she'd followed all the way here. Her confidence cracked instantly, slipping through her fingers like sand. I didn't realize, she stuttered. He spoke gently, without anger. You followed him here over a notice he wasn't required to respond to. She swallowed hard. I assumed? You assumed wrong, he said. She took a tiny step back, her voice shaking. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You forced yourself into a private cabin, he continued. on property outside your HOA's jurisdiction. You made legal threats you had no authority to make. And you treated both of us as if we owed you an explanation." She shook her head quickly. No, this is all a misunderstanding." "It isn't," he said simply. She looked at the floor, completely overwhelmed. Her earlier confidence had vanished, replaced with panic. He stepped closer, not threateningly, but with the weight of someone who knew the law well. "You may not realize how serious this is, but forcing entry into private property is not a small matter. And abusing a position of authority is even worse." Tears began gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from fear. She knew she had gone too far. She knew she had messed up in a way she couldn't talk herself out of. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold her. His calm tone made everything feel even more serious. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I want to understand every detail of why you're here." She sank into the nearest chair, her legs barely steady enough to hold her. He looked at his friend, who stood nearby, but hadn't spoken since revealing his identity. The weight of the situation settled between them. Then he approached her again. "We're going to have a real conversation," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly." She nodded quickly, desperate to show cooperation. That small lake cabin, which had been filled with peace just hours earlier, now held a strange tension, a mix of fear, authority, and consequences. She had come here believing she could control everything, but she had just walked straight into the one place where control no longer belonged to her. And for the first time, she understood the real meaning of the rules she always claimed to defend. This wasn't the end of her trouble. This was just the beginning. The next morning arrived with a strange kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful at all. It was the kind of silence someone feels right before an unexpected knock on the door, heavy, tense, and sitting right in the middle of the chest. The sun wasn't fully up when he stepped outside, and the chilled air pressed against his skin like a warning. Overnight, the ground had dried just enough to make the water line around his property even more visible. It curved like a dark border, showing exactly how far the lake had reached the day before. And even though the water had retreated, he knew it was only temporary. If things kept moving the way the HOA wanted, bigger problems were coming. He walked along the fence line, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, his boots sinking slightly in the soft soil. His mind kept replaying yesterday, how the workers rushed out, how the machines drowned in silence, how the HOA officer acted more annoyed than concerned. Instead of asking who merely got hurt, she worried more about meeting construction deadlines. And instead of apologizing, they treated him like he was the issue. He replayed her fake smile again and again in his mind. Something about that smile kept bothering him. It was the type that pretended to be friendly, but hid a blade behind it. He took a deep breath and reminded himself why he had kept calm. Losing his temper would have given them exactly what they wanted. Instead, he held on to patience, even though it was getting harder every day. Just as he reached the hill overlooking the construction area, he noticed movement. Several trucks, all with the same HOA emblem stamped across their doors, rolling in like a small convoy. They parked right next to the muddy opening left by the water. Workers came out carrying surveying tools, not hammers or saws. That was his first warning. The second came when he spotted two people in suits, each holding clipboards, stepping out of the last vehicle. He didn't recognize them. That alone set every alarm bell ringing. He started walking down toward them, keeping his steps steady and slow. The workers noticed him first. Some lowered their tools, whispering among themselves. Others looked away, clearly uneasy after yesterday's surprise flood. By the time he reached the main group, one of the suited officials had finally turned to acknowledge him. "Good morning," The man said with a tone as dry as old paper. "We were hoping you'd be here." He didn't answer at first. He wanted to see what they would say next. People reveal a lot when they think they're in control. "We're conducting an assessment," the man continued, tapping his clipboard. "The HOA informed us of some complications. It seems your property is causing some challenges for our development plan." He felt his eyebrow twitch. "My property?" he repeated slowly. "The same land your group built on without permission?" A small, tight smile crossed the man's face. "There appears to be a misunderstanding. According to the HOA, the land boundaries were unclear at the time of construction. They've assured us they're working on getting everything sorted. And yet," he said, looking around at the rows of unfinished homes, "you all seem very confident, acting like this place belongs to you." The other suited official, a woman, stepped forward. She wasn't smiling. Instead, she watched him the way someone studies a puzzle piece that doesn't fit the picture. "We want to avoid conflict," she said, "so we're hoping you'll cooperate while we verify the boundaries." He folded his arms. "And what exactly does cooperation mean to you?" "For now," she replied, "we need unrestricted access to all areas that might relate to the water system you control. The HOA believes yesterday's incident was intentional." There it was. The accusation he'd been waiting for. "So your bosses spend months building houses on my property," he said, "and I'm the one being questioned?" "We're just gathering information," the man said, his voice losing patience. "If you didn't do anything wrong, this won't take long." He looked at the muddy ground, then at the flooded tire tracks leading straight into the lake. He thought about yesterday, the panic, the fear in the eyes of the workers, the way the HOA tried pretending it was a simple misunderstanding. Now these two acted like he was the threat, but what bothered him most wasn't the accusation. It was the fact that these officials showed up without warning. The HOA didn't wait. They moved too fast. That meant they were scared of something. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't step back. Instead, he spoke with the calmest voice he could manage. "If you want to examine the water system, you'll need proper authorization. This lake isn't part of the HOA's land. It belongs to me. And every part of the dam, including the controls, are private property. You don't get access just because someone sent you here." The woman narrowed her eyes. "Are you refusing to cooperate?" "I'm refusing to be bullied." Her jaw tightened. She turned to the man, whispered something he couldn't hear. They both looked more irritated than before. Finally, the man sighed and gave him a stiff nod. "Fine," he said. "But don't blame us if this complicates things later." With that, they waved the workers to continue inspecting the area around the unfinished homes. The workers didn't dare step onto his land, but they measured, photographed, and documented everything in sight. The officials returned to their vehicles, speaking into phones while pointing at the lake. He watched them carefully. Every move they made was another clue that they were trying to build a case against him, something they could use later. When the workers started getting too close to his fence line, he raised his voice. "Stay on your side." They froze, nodded nervously, and backed away. He stayed on the hill for another hour, quietly observing until the trucks finally left. Not one of them looked at him as they drove off. It was as if they were pretending he didn't exist at all. As soon as they were gone, he walked straight to the dam. The water looked calm, but he knew that calm could vanish in seconds if the system was pushed. He checked the mechanism, ensuring nothing had been tampered with. Everything seemed normal, but the official's sudden interest in his water system had shaken him more than he expected. He sat on a wooden bench near the lake, trying to think. Birds moved in the trees behind him. The air felt heavier than before. He stared across the water, watching light reflect off the surface. He remembered when this place used to be quiet before the HOA, before the construction, before all the trouble. Back then, this land had felt peaceful, safe. Now it felt like he was living on a battleground. He stayed outside longer than he intended. When he finally went inside, he brewed a cup of tea and sat near the window overlooking the lake. He needed time to think. The HOA was changing strategies. They weren't just building illegally anymore. They were trying to build a narrative that made him look like the villain. He replayed the officials' words again. Intentional, complications, verify the boundaries. They weren't here for answers. They were here for evidence they could twist. He set his cup down and rubbed the side of his head. The situation was getting worse, faster than he expected. If he didn't stay smart, they'd corner him before he had a chance to reveal the truth. He didn't know exactly when he decided what to do next. Maybe it was the memory of those workers running for safety. Maybe it was the way the HOA officer had brushed aside the danger. Or maybe it was the cold, dismissive tone of those officials who acted as if he was nothing more than a problem to push aside. Whatever it was, something inside him shifted. He wasn't going to wait anymore. Not for them to send more officials. Not for another fake smile. And definitely not for the HOA too. Twist the story in their favor. It was time to prepare, quietly, carefully, because the final day was coming faster than the HOA. Expected or ITY from the HOA board. He shook his head slowly. The HOA board doesn't outrank state law, county law, property rights, or the water management regulations. She opened her mouth to respond, but one of the workers jogged up to her, whispering something urgently in her ear. Her expression shifted again, this time toward irritation, maybe toward worry. She dismissed the worker with a wave and forced her smile back into place. "Let's not make this complicated," she said. "If you just cooperate, everything will be easier." He didn't answer. Not yet. Meanwhile, the workers spread out, taking more photos, measuring areas near the lake, glancing over their shoulders as though waiting for something to go wrong. Some of them looked nervous, probably remembering how quickly the water rose when the dam spilled over that one day. Even though everything was safe now, memories like that stick. The officer stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you keep resisting," she said, "we'll have no choice but to escalate the situation." He looked up at her calmly. "Escalate how?" "We can challenge your ownership in court," she said. "And if the court sides with us, you'll lose access to this entire area." That was the moment he had been waiting for, not because he wanted conflict, but because he finally understood the HOA's real plan. They had no intention of admitting they built illegally. Instead, they wanted to twist the narrative until it looked like he was the one trespassing. If they could control the story, they could control the land. He reached into his jacket pocket. The officer stiffened, as if expecting him to pull out something dramatic. But all he took out was his phone. "I've been recording the conversation," he said simply. Her eyes widened for half a second before she regained her composure. "Recording is fine," she said, though her voice tightened. "We have nothing to hide." "That's good," he replied, "because neither do I." He tapped a button and held the phone up. The screen displayed a folder full of time-stamped videos. Construction crews illegally entering his land, HOA workers cutting through the fence, trucks carrying supplies across his boundary line, and several recorded discussions he had with officials over the past months. The officer stepped back slightly. "What is all this?" "Documentation," he said. "Every trespass, every unapproved construction, every false claim, every visit you made without permission, every refusal to acknowledge the real deed." Her face lost a little color. "And speaking of the deed," he added, "the state attorney general has already reviewed it. The entire crowd behind her shifted. "What?" she asked, her voice barely controlled. He didn't say anything else. Instead, he simply stepped aside. From the path leading down the hill came the sound of footsteps, measured, steady, unmistakably confident. The workers turned. The officers turned. Even the birds seemed to quiet down as the figure approached. A man in a suit walked toward them, carrying a briefcase. Not a local official. Not HOA. Not part of the construction crew. Someone with real authority. Someone she had not expected to see. And as the officer stared at him, truly stunned for the first time, he understood something. The HOA's final day wasn't coming later. It was happening right now.